Hey, it's Ian Bremmer, and you've seen the announcement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, has been concluded successfully. Not a surprise to me. That's something I've been talking about for a while now. There's been a lot of political commitment, more challenging than you would have liked it to see in the United States, but nonetheless, this was really muscled through primarily by Mike Froman, presently the U.S. Trade Representative, in my view, the most capable member of Obama's cabinet. It's very important for the United States strategically. I think it will by far go down to be the most significant foreign policy legacy, positive foreign policy legacy, I should be clear to say, of the Obama administration of both terms. We're talking about tighter economic integration for about 40% of the world's GDP. These are the NAFTA countries, the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, as well as America's allies and like-minded countries in Asia, the fastest growing and dynamic large part of the global economy. China, not invited into TPP because they don't have the standards. There are a couple of reasons why it's particularly important. The first is because it's positive for growth. You'll see that in the United States. Certainly over the next 10 years, you'll see probably half a point of top-line economic growth in the United States as a consequence of the TPP. It's enormous for some of America's trade partners. You think about Vietnam, where you could see 10% additional growth to GDP over the next decade as a consequence. There's Malaysia, probably something like 5 to 6. Strategically, it's important because this is America's allies have desperately wanted more U.S. in Asia. That's not been true of a lot of America's allies in Europe. It's certainly not been true in places in the Middle East. But in Asia, because of concerns about the growth of China, China being a state capitalist and authoritarian economy and government, concerns that the United States really needs to be supporting tighter both military and economic relationships. The TPP really does that. It's not just leading with sort of a carrier group. It's also important because ultimately the way that you want to get the Chinese aligned with the United States is to show that if they don't support American standards, that they're going to be isolated. They'll lose out on trade and capital flows. That's quite important with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, like when the Chinese didn't join the World Trade Organization. They weren't ready for it, but eventually they did. They signed up, and it led to better Chinese alignment and economic integration with the U.S. and the rest of the world. That's precisely what will happen with TPP. The Chinese originally were strongly opposed to it. Then they studied it. Now they're wondering, is it something they eventually want to join or at least align themselves with? Because the Chinese, of course, have developed competing trade groups, mostly driven on the basis of China's stronger bilateral economic relations with everybody that they're cutting a deal with in their region and beyond. Now, it's not that there's no downside around the Trans-Pacific Partnership. You've seen, of course, that Hillary Clinton, as candidate, has opposed the TPP, despite the fact that she was one of the architects when she was Secretary of State. We've certainly seen this from Bernie Sanders. We've seen it from many on the Democratic side. And there are reasons for that. On balance, the TPP is probably slightly negative for American employment. Certainly in terms of manufacturing jobs, this is a reduction of tariffs for manufactured exports from Asian countries into the United States. A lot of U.S.-based multinationals will probably end up producing more in Asia, and they'll end up shipping those exports into the United States. Cheaper for the Americans, better for productivity and the shareholders, but it does mean that those jobs are going to go away. On the other hand, agricultural tariffs are going down as well. It makes it easier for the Americans to export into other markets. On the ag side, we are the world's largest food exporters. A lot of that's pretty high value, and as a consequence, you'll see more American jobs in ag. One of the reasons I am not as troubled by this is because manufacturing jobs and agricultural jobs are going away, and they're not going away because of globalization at this point, though they were over the past decades. They're now going away because of technology. If you ask me, are we really going to see very large swings on the basis of TPP, as opposed to the fact that increasingly you're just automating manufacturing jobs, whether it's for food or for industrial goods? The answer is really the latter. So again, on balance here, I think this is a big win. You saw that Trade Promotion Authority did get through the fast track, one thing that Obama managed to get through Congress that otherwise hasn't accomplished very much. That means you're not going to see any trouble in Congress in getting this actually approved. And over the course of the coming months, despite the leadership change in the House, that's not a worry. This is a huge win for Japan and Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The TPP was not originally enormously popular. He had to make a lot of domestic reforms to get to the place that he is today. It's a big win for him economically. It helps push further reform in the country. So he's clearly happy. I saw him last week, and he smiled quite a bit when I said I was convinced that TPP was actually going to get done expeditiously. The one question you have about participation is actually Canada, because we have elections coming up shortly. Stephen Harper does look to me and to us like he's going to win re-election, but if he doesn't, there could be challenges with Canadian implementation, could slow all of this down a bit. Nonetheless, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. And I'll take one quick question from Shashank Kuda. How are India-U.S. ties useful to counter China military and economic power? Well, I mean, I don't think that the United States is trying to counter military power from China more broadly right now. I mean, I do believe that the Chinese military efforts that are problematic to the U.S. are really much more close to home. They're about Taiwan, they're about Hong Kong, and they're about the South and East China Sea. The Americans aren't coordinating much with the Indians on that, though certainly there are many U.S. defense producers, and the U.S. does have the largest defense industry in terms of export in the world. Russia is actually number 2. The Americans are going to start eating into the Russia-India relationship, which had been dominant, now that Modi wants a better relationship with the U.S., and he doesn't want MiGs that fall out of the sky when they're doing training runs. They actually call them flying coffins in India. So that's going to help the American companies. I don't think you're going to see a serious strategic alignment between the Americans and Indians militarily in the coming years. But economically, of course, this is important. India not a part of TPP. Again, far too much economic reform work that would need to happen to make them a potential candidate. But you are seeing a lot more integration in trade and investment from American firms into India. And I think as that happens, you'll see that the Chinese understand long-term that the rise of India is something that will be a geopolitical and geoeconomic balancer for them in Asia. On balance, that means that China is going to make a lot of ground up over the next 5 to 10 years, but long-term, the notion that China emerges as the world's superpower after the United States is really not something I'm particularly worried about. So anyway, that's a little bit on today's historic Trans-Pacific Partnership. I'm sure I'll be talking about it a lot over the course of the coming days and weeks. Take it easy. Have a good day.